This video is sponsored to you by SDMate SE. More on that at the end of the video. Android phones. In case if you don't know about Android phones, they are quite a versatile operating system. Now before we get into anything, I gotta make it clear that I don't take sides between iOS and Android. Because in my opinion, both of them have its own pros and cons. And even though I use an iPhone 12 Pro Max as my tracking camera and my daily driver, I still think there's a lot in Android to discover. Now with that said, there's one thing that I have to address that has been left alone for a very long time on my Android secondary driver, the Galaxy Note 10 Plus. Yeah, there may be some flaws. Some of the flaws happen to be a bit of hiccuping going on. Don't get me wrong, Chino is really adorable. And on top of that, Samsung has decided to discontinue security updates for the Galaxy Note 10 Plus, which also means this phone is no longer secure and it could be subject to security vulnerabilities after being left alone for a long time. Usually a general user would just buy a brand new phone, but I don't get that kind of luxury and I don't got that money, at least for now. So let's install a custom Android OS. Now you may be wondering to yourself, oh Mel, how do you do this? I've never tried this before. Oh, now don't worry. It may be quite simple once you get the hang of it, but it can get a little complicated since things are different from device to device, which in this case the Galaxy Note 10 Plus happens to be in the middle of what's being crazy much of a hassle and what's not a hassle. So as your tech wizardess girl, I've done my prior research about this. Now, the Galaxy Note 10 Plus is particularly one of those phones that are, at least according to the community, possibly a difficult one to handle. Considering how they're using a completely different chip, at least for the international variants, that is, not the Snapdragon chip, but rather Samsung's in-house Exynos chip, which means things can be a little bit different from the usual Qualcomm Snapdragon. However, I've done some digging around and I found two custom OSs that are currently actively being maintained by the community right now. However, there are more other different flavors of custom Android ROMs, but it's very subjective to the maintainers to see whether they would take the initiative to keep a ROM for a specific model up to date. Which in the case of the Galaxy Note 10 Plus, it's kinda sad to hear that there's only two that's currently being actively maintained right now. Or three for the matter. So let's get through each of them. We're going through the first step right now, which is selecting the ROM. Now the first ROM that I'm gonna go through right now is called Pixel OS, which is trying to become a Google Pixel for non-Google Pixel, pretty much. Which is kind of interesting actually. Before we get into that, we're gonna understand what is AOSP. So AOSP basically means Android Open Source Project, which is a project made by Google that allows people to create completely custom versions of Android of their own. Think of it like Android for Tinkers, that is separated from the proper manufacturer-made ones. Even though they may be separate, doesn't necessarily mean the quality can be subpar. If the team is right and they're all dedicated, I'm sure there are great features coming along with that. There's also a huge slew of ROMs out there that you can find that are tailored to specific cases. It's the same as when you're looking for different distros of Linux, where each distro of Linux is dedicated for specific cases, and you can pick to whichever to your likings, and you can customize it if you have the know-how to. However, Pixel OS makes this a little bit simpler for small tinkerers like me that are looking to just change things a little, but not do things insanely dramatically. I just want a really neat, well-maintained OS and stick with it, with the added benefit of my current situations, which in this case, Samsung's One UI is ridiculously bloated. If you don't know, there's a couple of web pages that talked about how many bloatware Samsung has in their operating systems, which is batshit insane in my opinion. So if you want to clean Android OS without the bloat, usually Android open source projects are amazing for that. Now there might be some more questions in your mind. Isn't that the same as rooting? No, they are not. Rooting is a completely different process for a different purpose. Rooting is like, for you iPhone users, jailbreaking, which is to break open the limits of what the OS can do, most of the time involving using exploits, to achieve customizability that are beyond what the stock software can do. But rooting can be done even on your current OS. You don't need to be on a specific OS to root. Thus why the topic I'm covering right now is completely unrelated. Right, getting back to Pixel OS, it basically tells Android OS into thinking that everything that it's got is a Pixel, even though you're actually not on the Pixel, which is kind of an interesting project in my opinion. This is admittedly one of the closest to a pure Google system that you can find. However, this comes with a whole lot of Google's own bloatware, like say you don't want Google Meet. With Pixel OS, I doubt that's possible. Which then this thing comes in. It's called CR Droid, which is a fork of an already existent, very well popular Android open source project called Lineage OS. So on top of what's available on this really clean Lineage OS, they added a few customizability that might tailor to your taste. All that with very minimal Google bloat. And considering how it is based on Lineage OS, whenever Lineage OS releases a weekly security updates, they can push it downstream and push these security updates to CR Droid users as well. And there's also a whole slew of customizability that you won't otherwise see on most other OSs, honestly. In my opinion, CR Droid is amazing when you want great customizability with very little footprint. Right, now that I've introduced you to two different custom Android ROMs, let's get into how we get into installing it. Now, like I said, each phones may vary by steps significantly. Which in this case, having a Samsung phone means you'll be patching your firmware completely differently from what a traditional Android phone would usually use, which is using a command line called Android Debug Bridge. However, for Samsung phones, they decided to take a different approach and use a firmware updater called Odin. Now, if you don't know what Odin is, I don't blame you. It is actually a leaked software from Samsung's labs that is used to perform updates directly into the phone by cable. These are actually meant for developers things, but with the program leaked, it basically unlocked a whole slew of customizability for the Samsung phones. And you can find Odin in this XDA forum. Please, click on the ones in my description. Do not Google search it because you might find fakes at some point. This thread is the real one. Be sure to bookmark it once you go there. Now the leaker has a couple of patches for Odin as well that bypasses a couple of things, but to me in my case, I don't really put use to it, so I'll probably be using the original version. And once you got Odin, the next thing you need to have is this Samsung Android USB driver, because if you don't have it, you might not be able to see your devices on your computer. Right, now that we're here, let's get to Pixel OS's Galaxy Note 10 Plus page, and we're gonna download the latest build of their ROMs and a copy of the recovery. For Pixel OS, you're going to need to get the recovery from this very thread right here, right down here for your respective devices. If you're using CR Droid, you can also do so here. However, if you want the latest weekly updates from Lineage OS, click on download older versions, to which it'll take you to the page on SourceForge. And as you can see on the file names, they are sorted by versions and by their build dates. The latest ones are usually security updates that came downstream from Lineage OS. If you want the absolute latest security updates from Lineage OS, you get them here. Otherwise, you can just get their recommended build, which is a little bit older. That has the December 2023 update as of the time of filming. And don't forget to grab the recovery for it as well. So for each ROMs, the two things you need is the ROM itself and the recovery. However, for CR Droid and Lineage OS, you're going to need one more thing. You see, some Android projects did not want to deal with legal issues with Google, so in turn they do not include Google Play services in their ROMs. So if you wish to have Google Play services, you would have to download one extra thing, which is GApps, which is usually provided by the ROM provider as a separate link to where you have to download from. So some of the older Android versions would have Open GApps, and then the more recent ones would have Mind the Gaps or Mind the GApps. See what they did there? So you gotta keep an eye on the version number, architecture, and the build date. So say for example, I'm going to install Android 13 from CR Droid. Then you have to match it right here on its name, 13. Following that is the architecture of your mobile device. Now, if you don't know about the architecture of your mobile device, it's fine. Lineage OS Wiki has infos about it. And if you just scroll down even a tiny bit from, say, the Galaxy Note 10 Plus site, you would see a section called Architecture, and there's your answer. So now we know that the Galaxy Note 10 Plus uses ARM64 for its architecture, which means now we put them all together, Android 13, ARM64, and there's no other builds, so this is the latest then. Then we click download. Once we've all obtained all the files that we need, then you end up with these sets of stuff. However, if you only have one OS each, you would only need need these two, this, and that's it, 3 stuff. Or 4. However, if you have one OS only, you would only want the Z OS and Odin, or which Lineage OS's case or CR Droid, you're gonna also need Mind the Gaps as well. Alright, shall we get into flashing? Not that kind of flashing, whatever you're thinking, no. Okay, first and foremost, we gotta do a really important thing. We gotta head to the settings, scroll all the way down, and click About Phone. Go to Software Information and click the build number 7 times. 1, 2... You'll count down here, as you can see, as you click. If you happen to have pin set on your device, you would also need that as well. Right, now with developer mode turned on, let's go back to the front of the settings, and you see there's one more entry called Developers Options. We click into that, and we scroll down a teeny tiny bit, and you see right here, right where my tip is at, OEM unlocking. We're gonna need to unlock that because we're making modifications to our systems. Some devices, even though you're not touching the bootloader, still wants you to unlock the bootloader in order to make modifications to your system. So it's always best to turn it on. However, if you do run into a very rare case where this option is completely missing, please do refer to this guide where it tells you to set your date 7 days behind. Otherwise, if you still can't find it, you probably have to reinstall the stock firmware that you're currently on. Right, after you've went through your PIN, it would tell you, warning, device protection features will not work on this device while this setting is turned on. That's fine, because we're not going to be using this OS anymore anyways. Right, now with that enabled, all we have to do is say goodbye to this. Oh, you weren't expecting goodbye? Well then, do your backups right now. You are going to say goodbye to this instance of your phone. You're going to say hello to a brand new operating system. Okay, now that you've backed up everything and you're about to say goodbye to this OS, we're gonna shut it down. Good night. Now that we turned the phone off, what we need is a USB cable that corresponds to your phone, which in my case, I got a Type-C cable. Now this step varies significantly depending on phone models. Some phones would have different combinations, some phones would have different steps. You're going to need to find a step on how to enable Odin, at least for the Samsung devices. Which in the case of Galaxy Note 10 Plus, what you have to do is press the plus and minus volume key, the up and down key, volume key, which I could kind of just mash it with my hands, and stick the USB device, USB cable in. It should turn down with a completely different screen like this. Warning, a custom OS can cause critical problems in the phone and install applications. If you want to download a custom OS, press the volume up key. Now there is a second layer of unlocking that we have to do. We have unlocked the bootloader, but we haven't really unlocked the bootloader proper. So what we have to do is actually press and hold the volume up key as what it says right here. It would ask you whether you want to unlock your bootloader. We will definitely need this because otherwise we will not be able to install custom Android OSs on Samsung phones. So like it says volume up to yes, we're going to press volume up. Now it says this phone's bootloader is unlocked and its software integrity can't be verified. Very well, that's exactly what we need. But considering how the phone rebooted itself and erased all the data, we need to jump back to that same screen that we were at earlier. And that's because Samsung requires you to activate your device for some weird fucking reason. That means you have to go through all the freaking setup for all over again. So all you need to do is connect to the internet and skip through all the setup. When you head back to the developer settings, you see that your bootloader is already unlocked. Right, what we need to do now is to get this phone into Odin mode. And to do that, I'm gonna press these two buttons together and stick in the USB to get back to this screen, volume up to continue. Now what we want to do is select the recovery image that we just downloaded from Google Drive and press on start. Once that's done, immediately press the power and the volume up key until you see the recovery screen. Now before we do any flashing, we're gonna make sure that we have formatted all the data and factory reset. We're gonna make sure that we're cleaning up the entirety of the drive because we don't want any leftovers from Samsung One UI to be affecting our process. Right, what we wanted to do next is to head down to Apply Update and Apply from ADB. This puts this phone on ADB sideload. And what does this mean? Is that we have to get onto terminal and you're going to need a binary called ADB or Android Debug Bridge. If you don't have it, you gotta get it. And put it somewhere convenient where your terminal can see or add it into your environment path. Right, to make sure that the ADB can actually see the device right now, we're gonna type ADB devices, and then we get to see the device right there. And what we wanna do is type ADB sideload, and we gotta copy the firmware file name in its whole, including the zip file, including the zip, and paste it in, and press enter. This should ship the ROM file into the recovery, and that should be our first step into a brand new operating system. Alright, once that's done, we're gonna press factory reset once more, but this time only factory reset format data. And then, finally, we can reboot. Now every time we boot, it's going to give us the warning of the bootloader being unlocked, but we need to keep it unlocked considering how we're using a custom OS that is well outside of Samsung's own operating system. When it boots up, it goes through a lot of the first time setup stuff, so don't panic when it takes quite long to start on its first boot. Usually it would take up to 10 to 15 minutes. If you're lucky, it would take shorter than that. So in the meantime, go ahead and have a cup of tea or grab some snacks while you wait for this to finish booting up. Hey, here we are. By the way, we're completely through the flashing process now, so we can just unplug the device if we feel like it. And now this is going to be your proper operating system. So just run through the setup the way you usually would. Set up using another device. Now I'm good. Getting your phone ready. This may take a few minutes. Set up a pin later. And there you have it. Pixel OS. And as you can see, the sets of applications that are here are very, very bare bones. And that's expected of Pixel OS. Now say you don't want Pixel OS, how do we install CR Droid or Lineage OS? Or say you want a different operating system for this Samsung phone. We're gonna run through this whole process once again. Right, now that we know how to install Pixel OS onto the Galaxy Note 10 Plus, we're gonna do the same with CR Droid, just with one extra step. They're not all too different, so we should be able to follow the exact same steps. So starting, we're gonna need Odin, as usual, and we're gonna need our recovery. So what you wanna do is rename it to recovery.image. Add it into a tar archive using your favorite archive tool. Say for example 7-zip or WinRAR. With that, we would have the resulting tar file. Now what you want to do is click on AP in Odin and open recovery.tar. Now that we got it all prepped up, let's take the phone. Remember these usual steps. Volume up and down and USB in. Oi. And we should get that same old screen that we just had some time ago. Here, let me just get it zoomed in so you can see it real clearly like that. And what we want to do is, as usual, if we have already unlocked the bootloader, then we should just press volume up. And now it should consider be connected. As we can see on Odin, we have something connected. And now we just have to push it into the device that way. It should be relatively fast and it should not take long. And now that we've done that, we gotta press our power button up to get into the recovery. There are times where you end up screwing up and you end up booting back into your Android OS. That's perfectly fine. So what you wanna do is get the phone back down. And what you wanna do is press the volume up key and the power button. If fuck all doesn't work, you could always open up the developer options once again. Head down to USB debugging and turn it on. Now that we're there, we're gonna open up our terminal. Plug in the device and type the following: ADB devices. Because what we wanna do is check if it can find the SID device. And usually it would just ask you if you would allow USB debugging. That usually is a good signal that it works. And now that we tried it again, you could see that now the device has been shown as device. We can now jump straight into the recovery without pressing these stupid combinations by typing ADB reboot recovery. Press enter, and this should take the device straight to the recovery. Now that we're on CR Droid recovery, what you want to do is do the usual wipe and cleanup that we have done before. So format data, format everything, clean everything up. We don't want any traces from the previous installation because different ROMs can result in different ways of implementing shit. They're all not exactly the same. So we're gonna need to format everything, clean them all up, and prep this thing for flashing. Once we've done all three of them, we're gonna now hit to apply update and apply from ADB once more. Now that we're here, we're gonna do a really important step. ADB side load. And what you wanna do is take the ROM file, which if your terminal is already in the directory where your desired folder is at, you could just put the name. Otherwise, you're gonna need to drag the file in and press enter. Now that it's done, we still got one more step. Like I said earlier, some ROMs do not include Google Play services and other Google require stuff for Google Play to work. So we're gonna need to install that as well. So if you remember that we've downloaded this Mind the Gaps zip, now it's the time we're gonna sideload this on top of the ROM that we've just installed. So we're gonna click apply update and click apply from ADB once more. At this point, it should be relatively self-explanatory. ADB side load and the file. And we press enter. This should install Mind the Gaps and do all the jobs for us. Now that it's done, what do we want to do is just reboot the system now. We're done here. You're finally on CR Droid. Now if you remember from the video earlier, it does take a while for CR Droid to finish booting up. And here we are now. We're finally on CR Droid. Now we just have to run through the setup like usual. Once you've gone through all the setup, there's only one button. Start. And here we are, we're finally now on CR Droid. I wouldn't say the cleanest, but it is relatively clean of an operating system. What I really like a lot personally about CR Droid is that they have extra stuff that you can change that are mostly cosmetics. However, as cosmetic as they are, they can make your phone feel kind of unique to yourself. Some of which are functional, or say for example, you want to unlock higher frame rates for certain games. You have an option for that. Or you could also have unlimited photo storage that mimics the benefits that Pixel XL usually have. And there's a whole slew of other different kind of quality of life improvements that I personally like that you don't get from its upstream, namely Lineage OS. So I'm definitely going to be daily driving the CR Droid personally. And there you have it. We finally breathed new life to an Android device that we could have otherwise thrown as e-waste. Now if you do enjoy this video, be sure to press the like button, subscribe, and be sure to check out all the resources I have in the description below for where you need to download these files. And I hope you enjoy one of my first few tech videos. And with that said, thank you all so much for watching. See you guys next time. Otsu Mero deshita. See ya! And with that out of the way, time to tell you about our sponsor. Tired of slowness and long loading? Want to make more space for your stuff? Well, Estimate SE is here to help. Estimate SE is a junk cleaner made by an indie developer named Darken. Some apps tend to leave leftover files we don't need after we're done using them. That's where Estimate SE comes in to help. Now you can do that manually, but time is money. With Estimate SE, you can automate a good deal of that, and leave precious times to the things that really matter the most. Unlike other system junk cleaners, Estimate SE does not collect any form of personally identifiable info that could be sold to scummy data miners for profit. Nor does it bombard you with a fuck ton of ads that waste your time. Like I said, time is money. Estimate SE heavily relies on the generosity of the community to stay alive and going. App improvements happen with the help and contribution from the great community in GitHub and Discord. So if there's any bug with the app, you're never alone. What are you waiting for? Get your phone cleaned with Estimate SE on the Google Play Store or GitHub in the description below. Oh, maybe I should clean my phone screen too. With that, thanks to Darken Development for encouraging me to walk forward in content creation. Catch you next time! Oi!